The night before my wedding, I stood outside the dimly lit lounge of the Kingsley Grand Hotel, gripping a small velvet box in my hands. Inside were a pair of cufflinks, an heirloom from Nathan's grandfather, something his mother had insisted he wear on our big day. I had planned to surprise him, a small token of love before we vowed to spend forever together. But fate had a crueler surprise waiting for me. Through the slightly ajar door, I heard Nathan's voice, deep and familiar, yet dripping with something I had never noticed before: arrogance, entitlement. The sound of clinking glasses and low laughter from his groomsmen filled the air. "Come on, man," Blake's voice carried through the room, light-hearted but teasing. "You can't be serious about settling down with just one woman. You, Nathan Kingsley." A chuckle. Nathan's chuckle. The same one that had once made my heart flutter. "Why not?" he replied smoothly. "Sienna is perfect on paper. Beautiful, well-connected, and that trust fund? It'll help expand Kingsley Enterprises more than any investor could." Laughter erupted around him. My stomach twisted, bile rising in my throat. "Besides," Nathan continued, his voice slurring slightly from the whiskey, "she's completely devoted to me. The best part? She actually believes I love her." More laughter. "Jesus, Nate," another friend snickered. "That's ice cold." "It's just temporary anyway," Nathan added, his voice lowering but still clear enough to cut through me like glass. "Until someone better comes along. Someone more suitable for the long run." The room exploded with cheers, a chorus of male camaraderie celebrating his blatant deception. I felt the world around me tilt. My fingers clenched the velvet box so tightly that my nails dug into my palm. 3 years. 3 years of whispered promises, of carefully crafted dreams, of nights spent believing I had found my forever. All of it had been a lie. I wanted to burst in, throw the box at his feet, scream at him until my voice was hoarse. But I didn't. Instead, an eerie calm settled over me. This wasn't a love story anymore. It was a reckoning. I turned and walked away, my heels echoing against the marble floor of the hotel hallway. Every step felt surreal, like I was floating above my own body. The wedding dress waiting for me in my suite, the floral arrangements being finalized, the guests arriving from across the country. It was all part of an illusion I had been too blind to see. Nathan Kingsley didn't love me. He loved control. And he had assumed that, like every other piece on his chessboard, I would move exactly as he planned. But tomorrow, when I walked down that aisle, I wouldn't be walking to him. I would be walking toward his destruction. Back in my hotel suite, I locked the door and stared at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't broken. She wasn't defeated. She was furious. I pulled out my laptop and took a deep breath. Nathan had underestimated me. He had assumed that because I was soft-spoken, because I believed in love, I was weak. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. I had access to everything: emails, financial records, private correspondence. As his silent business partner, I had been given clearance to Kingsley Enterprises' digital vaults. What had once been a symbol of trust between us was now my greatest weapon. For hours, I sifted through transactions, flagged inconsistencies, cross-referenced documents, and then, buried between encrypted emails and offshore accounts, I found it: proof of his true nature. Nathan wasn't just using me for financial gain. He had been siphoning funds, manipulating investors, covering up fraudulent deals. And worst of all, he had already begun making arrangements to shift assets to his mistress, Victoria Hastings, one of his board members, after the wedding. A wedding he never intended to honor. A cold, sharp laugh escaped my lips. He thought he had won. Tomorrow, in front of 200 guests, his colleagues, his investors, and the media elite, I would make sure everyone saw Nathan Kingsley for what he truly was. Not a brilliant entrepreneur, not a devoted fiancé, but a liar, a fraud, a man whose empire was about to crumble beneath him. As dawn broke, I closed my laptop, my plan solidified. My phone buzzed with a text. Private investigator. Final confirmations secured. Reporter and SEC officials in position. A slow smile spread across my lips. The stage was set. Nathan Kingsley thought he was marrying a queen, but today he would kneel before his reckoning. 3 years. That's how long I had spent believing in a beautifully constructed lie. A fairy tale carefully spun with just the right amount of charm, devotion, and the illusion of unconditional love. I had never questioned it, not once. Because when someone shows you the version of love you've always dreamed of, it's easier to believe than to look too closely. Nathan Kingsley had mastered the art of deception. It started the way all great love stories do. Grand gestures, whispered promises under city lights, the feeling of being the center of someone's world. Our first date had been at an exclusive rooftop restaurant overlooking the skyline, the entire venue booked just for us. He had leaned across the candlelit table, his eyes filled with admiration as he told me, "I've never met anyone like you, Sienna. You're extraordinary." I had been swept away. The months that followed were a series of picture-perfect moments. Weekends in the Hamptons, charity galas where he introduced me as the woman who makes everything in my life better. Quiet Sunday mornings where he would tuck a strand of hair behind my ear and say, "I can't wait to spend forever with you." Nathan knew exactly how to play the role of the devoted partner. And I had been the perfect audience. But love, when built on illusion, is nothing more than a house of cards. And the night before my wedding, I had finally seen the sleight of hand. I sat on the edge of my hotel bed, staring at my engagement ring. The same ring Nathan had slipped onto my finger on a starlit evening in Santorini, where he had gone down on one knee and asked me to be his forever. My heart had nearly burst from happiness that night. I had said yes without hesitation, without doubt, without a single thought that the man I was pledging my life to saw me as nothing more than a transaction. Now, in the harsh morning light, that ring felt like a shackle. I thought about Eleanor Kingsley, Nathan's mother, a woman of elegance, grace, and unwavering devotion to her son. She had welcomed me into her family with open arms, filling the void my parents had left when they passed. "You're the daughter I always wanted," she had told me one evening, clasping my hands in hers. "Nathan is lucky to have found someone as kind and intelligent as you. You'll make a wonderful wife." I had believed her. I thought about Isabel, Nathan's younger sister, my best friend in every way that mattered. She had been overjoyed when Nathan proposed, practically bouncing with excitement as she hugged me. "You two are the dream couple," she had gushed. "This wedding is going to be everything. Everything. Everything I had spent years planning. Everything I had thought would lead to happiness. Everything that now felt like a cruel joke." I wanted to tell them both the truth, to warn them, to shield them from the devastation that was coming. But I couldn't. Not yet. Nathan's world had been built on deception. And today I would shatter it piece by piece. Before I share what happened next, the moment that left an entire room of journalists in stunned silence, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, hit that like button, because this story is just getting started. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stand. The dress was waiting. The guests were arriving. And Nathan Kingsley? He had no idea that the woman walking down the aisle toward him was no longer the woman he had deceived. She was something else entirely. The moment of truth, setting the stage for revenge. For a long time, I had believed that heartbreak would feel like an explosion, a cataclysmic event that shattered everything in an instant. But that wasn't how it happened. Instead, it was slow, cold, a creeping numbness that settled into my bones as I stood outside that lounge, clutching a velvet box filled with cufflinks meant for a man who had just laughed at my existence. Nathan Kingsley had reduced me to a mere stepping stone, placeholder. The words repeated in my mind, over and over, until they no longer felt like knives but like something else entirely. Fuel. I turned and walked away, my steps measured, my breath steady, my vision sharpened, my mind clearer than it had ever been. There was no room for sorrow, no space for tears, because this wasn't just about a broken engagement. This was war. By the time I reached my hotel suite, I had already begun cataloging my next moves. Every breath I took was deliberate, every action calculated. I locked the door behind me, slipped off my heels, and pulled my laptop onto my lap. The screen glowed in the dark, illuminating a face I barely recognized in the reflection. This version of me wasn't the hopeful woman who had spent months planning the perfect wedding. She was someone new, someone dangerous. Nathan had spent years perfecting his deception, weaving a web of lies so intricately that even I, the woman closest to him, hadn't seen the truth until now. But I wasn't just anyone. Nathan had chosen me because I was intelligent, because I was resourceful, because I had the power to elevate him. And now, I would be the one to destroy him. I inhaled deeply, fingers steady as I opened his private business account. As his silent business partner, I had access to everything: emails, financial transactions, confidential reports. Nathan had trusted me with the keys to his kingdom. A cruel mistake. It took less than 10 minutes for me to find the first red flag. A wire transfer routed through a shell corporation. The amount was staggering. It was labeled as a business expense, but a deeper dive revealed the truth. Embezzlement. I clicked through more documents, searching, digging, and then I found it. Buried under layers of encrypted emails was a series of messages between Nathan and Victoria Hastings, his so-called business associate. Once the wedding is finalized, we can move forward. The merger will go through without any complications, and her assets will be legally bound to Kingsley Enterprises. She doesn't suspect a thing. Give it 6 months, then we start the process. By then, she'll be too invested to back out. Each word was a carefully sharpened dagger. Each sentence another reason to watch him burn. I scrolled further, my pulse steady, my resolve growing stronger. She's temporary, a means to an end. It's just business. Business. That's all I had ever been to him. Nathan hadn't just planned to betray me. He had mapped out the destruction of everything I had built, piece by piece, ensuring that by the time I realized what was happening, it would be too late. But he had underestimated me. I wasn't just going to ruin his wedding day. I was going to ruin his entire life. I picked up my phone, my voice calm as I made the first call. "Detective Collins," I said when he answered. "I have something you'll want to see." He hesitated. "Ms. Carter, are you?" "I have evidence of corporate fraud," I interrupted. "A series of financial transactions that link Kingsley Enterprises to offshore accounts. I'll send them over now." There was a brief pause, then a quiet sigh. "I'll take a look." I hung up and moved to the next name on my list. A journalist I trusted. Someone who had spent years exposing men like Nathan. Men who built their empires on deception. "Harper, it's Sienna." "Sienna? It's... God. Isn't tomorrow your wedding day?" I ignored the question. "I have a story for you." A sharp inhale. "I'm listening." I told her everything. Every detail. Every lie. Every piece of evidence. By the time I was finished, her voice had shifted from curiosity to pure, unfiltered adrenaline. "How soon can I get the files?" "They're already in your inbox." Another pause, then a slow chuckle. "Oh, sweetheart, he has no idea what's coming for him." No, he didn't. And then I made the final call. A quiet voice answered on the other end. "Ms. Carter, do we have confirmation?" I exhaled, closing my eyes for a brief moment. "Yes, proceed as planned." A quiet hum of approval. "Understood. Everything will be in place by noon." I hung up, my heart steady. The pieces were set. Nathan thought he had won. But in less than 24 hours, he would watch his kingdom fall. I shut my laptop, leaned back against the pillows, and let the silence settle around me. For the first time in years, I felt in control. For the first time in years, I felt free. The sun rose, casting golden light over the city skyline. I stood, stretching, and caught my reflection in the mirror. Today, I was supposed to be a bride. Instead, I was something else entirely. A reckoning, a storm. And when I walked down that aisle, it wouldn't be to say I do. It would be to say checkmate, gathering evidence. The weight of the night still clung to me as I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the quiet glow of my laptop screen. The city outside was beginning to wake, but inside this room, time felt frozen. The past 6 hours had been a descent into truth. A brutal, undeniable truth that had unraveled everything I thought I knew. Nathan Kingsley wasn't just a liar. He was a predator. A man who had spent years crafting an illusion, luring me into a future that was never meant to be mine. But illusions shatter. And I was going to make sure his did, publicly, permanently, and without a single chance for redemption. I cracked my knuckles and rolled my shoulders back. There was no hesitation, no doubt. Just quiet, methodical calculation. Nathan had built his life on deception. Now I would burn it all down. I navigated through the encrypted files, my fingers swift and steady. As his silent business partner, I had been given access to nearly every part of Kingsley Enterprises. I had signed contracts, attended meetings, played the role of the devoted fiancé who trusted her future husband implicitly. He had assumed that meant I wouldn't look too closely. He had assumed wrong. I pulled up the first set of financial transactions, my breath steady as I scanned the numbers. They were layered beneath legal jargon, hidden behind subsidiaries and offshore accounts. But to someone who knew where to look, the discrepancies were obvious. The first red flag, a multimillion-dollar transfer to a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, an entity that didn't exist beyond paperwork. The second, funds siphoned from Kingsley Enterprises investors, rerouted through a series of bogus accounts. The third, an ongoing pattern of financial fraud stretching back years. This wasn't just about me. Nathan wasn't just a heartless fiancé. He was a criminal, a man who had built his empire on stolen trust and carefully orchestrated deceit. And he had left me with every tool to destroy him. I clicked through the files, my mind piecing together the puzzle as I uncovered more. Documents detailing fraudulent transactions. Emails between Nathan and his business associate, his mistress, Victoria Hastings, explicitly discussing the transfer of my assets once the wedding was finalized. A contract draft outlining his planned merger with a competing firm, one that would be secured the moment I became legally bound to him. Everything was spelled out in black and white. Nathan had made one fatal miscalculation. He had believed his own lie, that I was blind, naive, and helpless. But I wasn't any of those things. I was the woman who now held the key to his destruction. I exhaled sharply and started compiling the evidence into a single airtight dossier. This wasn't going to be a private battle. This was going to be a public execution. I pulled out my phone and typed out a message. To Harper Langley, investigative journalist. Subject: Kingsley Enterprises, exclusive. Harper, I have something for you. A story unlike anything you've ever covered. It involves fraud, deception, and a man who's about to face the consequences of underestimating the wrong woman. Attaching documents. I suggest you be ready by noon. I hit send. Harper was relentless, one of the best in the industry. Once she got a hold of this, it would be everywhere. Nathan's perfect life, his gleaming reputation, gone. I turned back to the screen, adrenaline surging through me as I moved to the next phase. The SEC. Nathan had been laundering money through international accounts for years, manipulating shareholders and presenting false financial reports. The moment the Securities and Exchange Commission saw the documents I had compiled, they would have no choice but to launch an investigation. And Kingsley Enterprises? It would collapse under the weight of its own corruption. I drafted the email, attached the evidence, and sent it without hesitation. To SEC Fraud Division. Subject: Urgent investigation, Kingsley Enterprises. Attached are financial records detailing fraudulent activities conducted by Kingsley Enterprises. These transactions involve offshore accounts, embezzlement, and investor fraud. I trust you will find the information compelling. Expect additional details to surface by noon today. Anonymous. There was no stopping now. I made the next call. A direct line to Detective Collins, a man who owed me a favor. Collins, he answered gruffly. This better be good. It is, I replied smoothly. I have documented proof of financial crimes involving Kingsley Enterprises. Fraud, embezzlement, offshore laundering. I'm sending everything to you now. A long pause. Then, how solid is the evidence? Unshakable. Another silence. Then the faint rustling of papers on his end. "You realize what you're doing, Carter?" I did. I was tearing down a man powerful enough to make people disappear. A man who had spent his life ensuring that the rules didn't apply to him. And I wasn't afraid. "I do," I said. "I just need to know you'll be ready when the time comes." "You have my word," Collins muttered. "I'll have a team standing by." I hung up and took a deep breath. It was done. The evidence was in place. The key players had been activated. The storm was gathering. And Nathan? He was blissfully unaware. The thought sent a slow, cold smile to my lips. Tomorrow he would wake up expecting a wedding. Expecting to slip a ring onto my finger, sign the final papers, and secure his ultimate prize. Instead, he would watch his world collapse around him. And when he looked at me for answers, I would be standing there, veil and all, holding the match that burned it all down. The perfect setup. The clock on my nightstand read 4:17 a.m., but sleep was a foreign concept now. Adrenaline pulsed through my veins, sharper than any blade, keeping me anchored in the moment. There was no turning back, no second-guessing. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about justice. Nathan had spent years perfecting the image of a man who could do no wrong. An accomplished businessman, a devoted son, the kind of man people trusted with their investments, their reputations, their futures. By the time I was finished, no one would trust him with so much as loose change. I moved through my suite with quiet efficiency, gathering everything I would need for the hours ahead. My wedding dress hung near the window, the delicate lace catching the early morning light, looking almost ethereal, a symbol of love, commitment, forever. Except today it would serve a different purpose. Today it would be armor. I walked to the vanity, opening the small jewelry box where my engagement ring sat in its velvet cushion. I picked it up, rolling it between my fingers, studying the way the diamonds caught the light. Once this had been a promise. Now it was evidence. I snapped a photo and sent it to Harper Langley, the journalist I had contacted hours ago. Kingsley spent over $500,000 on this ring. Thought it might be a nice touch for the article. Her response came within seconds. "Harper. Oh, sweetheart. The world is going to love watching a fraud like him get exposed. You ready for today? Me more than ever." She sent back a simple thumbs-up emoji, but I could almost hear the excitement behind it. Harper thrived on stories like this. Powerful men brought to their knees, their carefully constructed empires crumbling beneath them. And Nathan? He had just become her next headline. The thought sent a thrill of satisfaction through me, but there was still work to be done. I reached for the cream-colored envelope sitting on my desk, the one containing every damning piece of evidence I had spent the night compiling. Every financial record, every wire transfer, every email proving that Nathan wasn't just a liar, he was a thief. And soon the world would know it. I tucked the envelope into the discreet pocket I had sewn into my wedding dress. Nathan had always told me I was meticulous, that I paid attention to details in ways most people didn't. He had no idea just how right he was. Step 1, the media bomb. At exactly 7 a.m., I made my next move. I sent the final, comprehensive dossier to every major news outlet in the city, along with an embargoed statement that would be released at 12 p.m. right when the wedding ceremony was supposed to begin. The press would be waiting, the cameras would be rolling, and Nathan's downfall would be broadcast in real time. Harper had arranged for photographers to be stationed discreetly at the venue, ready to capture the exact moment everything imploded. There would be no way for Nathan to escape the headlines. No way for him to spin his lies into something palatable. For a man obsessed with his reputation, this was the ultimate death sentence. Step 2. The SEC infiltration. Nathan had spent years manipulating investors, feeding them promises built on nothing but smoke and mirrors. By the time they realized what he had done, he would have already drained them dry. But today that stopped. The SEC officials I had contacted would be on site before the wedding even began, blending seamlessly into the crowd of high-profile guests. Silent observers waiting for the moment to strike. By the time Nathan realized what was happening, the investigation would already be in motion. his accounts frozen, his assets under scrutiny. And Kingsley Enterprises? It wouldn't survive the day. Step 3. The ultimate public humiliation. Destroying Nathan in court would have been satisfying. Watching his company collapse from afar would have been justice. But it wasn't enough. No, I wanted him to feel it. To stand at the altar, surrounded by friends, family, and the entire elite of New York, believing that he had won, only to have everything ripped away from him. I wanted him to watch the future he had so carefully constructed turn to ashes in his hands. And I wanted him to know that it was me who set the fire. I had spent the past few years perfecting the role of the woman he thought I was, the devoted, trusting fiancé, the one who adored him blindly, the one who never asked too many questions. Today I would play that role one last time. I would walk down that aisle. I would meet his eyes, steady and unwavering. And then, when the moment was right, I would shatter his world with nothing more than a few carefully chosen words. I closed my laptop, exhaling slowly. Everything was in place. Nathan had spent years underestimating me. Today, he would learn that the biggest mistake of his life was assuming I was weak. The final countdown. At 10:30 a.m., the bridal suite was filled with nervous excitement. My bridesmaids were flitting around, adjusting their dresses, reapplying lipstick, sipping champagne. The room smelled of roses and vanilla, a perfect backdrop for what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Eleanor entered, beaming, holding my bouquet in her delicate hands. "Oh, Sienna," she sighed, her eyes misty. "You look stunning. This is exactly how I imagined today." I forced a smile, accepting the bouquet. I had always loved Eleanor. She had been a mother to me in ways my own never could. And after today, I would break her heart. Not because I wanted to, but because Nathan had given me no choice. I squeezed her hand gently. "I just want you to know," I murmured. "No matter what happens today, you've been so good to me, more than I ever deserved." She frowned slightly, sensing something deeper in my words. But before she could ask, Isabel appeared, grinning. "Ready, bride?" she teased, adjusting my veil. "Nathan's going to lose his mind when he sees you." If only she knew. I caught my reflection in the mirror, my face calm, my posture poised. No fear, no hesitation, just quiet, calculated certainty. Outside, the string quartet began to play the soft, familiar notes of Pachelbel's canon. A song Nathan and I had chosen together on a rainy Sunday afternoon when I still believed in the fairy tale. Now it was the soundtrack to his downfall. I took a final breath as the doors to the bridal suite opened. And then, with the weight of the envelope pressing against my thigh, I stepped forward, toward the altar, toward my future, toward the moment Nathan Kingsley would finally face the consequences of betraying the wrong woman. Morning of the wedding. The world outside my window was bathed in soft golden light, the city slowly waking as the first rays of morning stretched across the skyline. Birds chirped in the distance, and below, the streets buzzed with life, cars honking, footsteps echoing against the pavement. The rhythmic hum of a city that never truly slept. It was the kind of morning that should have felt magical, the kind of morning a bride dreams about. Instead, it felt like the calm before a storm. I sat on the edge of my bed, still wrapped in the silk robe I had thrown on hours ago. The cream-colored envelope pressed against my thigh, hidden deep within the folds of my robe, its contents heavier than any fabric. My fingers curled around its edges, feeling the weight of what was inside. This wasn't just paper. This was destruction. I inhaled deeply, my heartbeat steady, my thoughts razor-sharp. There was no turning back. The plan was in motion. The pieces were in place. By the end of today, Nathan Kingsley would be a broken man. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. "Sienna?" Isabel's voice was muffled through the wood. "Are you awake?" I closed my eyes for a brief moment, centering myself. Then, smoothing out my expression, I stood and walked to the door, pulling it open with a small, practiced smile. Isabel grinned, stepping inside without hesitation. She was still in her silk bridesmaid robe, her long honey-blonde hair cascading over her shoulders in effortless waves. "Oh my God!" she breathed, taking my hands in hers. "I can't believe it's finally here. Your wedding day." I let out a soft laugh, the sound hollow even to my own ears. "Believe me," I murmured. "Neither can I." She didn't catch the double meaning. Her excitement was genuine, untouched by the truth lurking beneath the surface. She had no idea that the wedding she had spent months helping plan was about to implode. And I hated that. I hated that she was going to be collateral damage in her brother's downfall. Because for all of Nathan's sins, Isabel was good. She was kind. She had been my friend. And after today, I didn't know if she ever would be again. "Come on." She tugged at my hands, oblivious to my turmoil. "Everyone's waiting for you. The glam squad is here. You need to eat something before we start." Eleanor made sure there's fresh fruit and pastries. And mimosas. Mimosas. How fitting. I let her lead me into the suite's main room, where the energy was electric. My bridesmaids were already seated in makeup chairs, chatting and sipping champagne, their laughter light and airy. The entire scene felt surreal. A room full of women preparing for the happiest day of my life, unaware that in just a few short hours, that happiness would turn to shock. I took my place in front of the mirror, my reflection staring back at me, poised, calm, unreadable. As the hairstylist began curling my hair, Eleanor swept into the room, radiating effortless grace. She was the definition of elegance, her navy blue dress tailored to perfection, her pearl earrings glinting in the soft morning light. The moment her eyes landed on me, they softened. "Sienna, darling," she murmured, stepping closer. "You look breathtaking already." I swallowed, my throat tightening. Eleanor had always been warm toward me, had treated me as if I were already part of the family. She had called me the daughter she never had trusted me with Nathan's heart, believing I would protect it. And now I was about to shatter her world. "Thank you," I said quietly. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears as she reached for something in her clutch. "I wanted you to have this," she said, fastening a delicate pearl necklace around my throat. "It's been in the Kingsley family for generations. Nathan's grandmother wore it on her wedding day, and so did I." The pearls were cool against my skin, a sharp contrast to the heat rising in my chest, a symbol of tradition, of love, of the family I was about to tear apart. I forced another smile, steadying my voice. "It's beautiful, Eleanor. Thank you." She squeezed my hands gently, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath my surface. "Take a deep breath, darling," she whispered. "Today is the start of the rest of your life." Yes, but not in the way she thought. The morning passed in a blur of hairspray, lipstick touches, and champagne toasts I couldn't bring myself to drink. Every moment felt like a slow march toward the inevitable. Every innocent laugh, every well-wish, every whisper of "you're going to make the most beautiful bride" was another reminder of what was coming. By the time my dress was fastened, and my veil secured, the weight of it all pressed against my chest like an iron vice. Then, at exactly 11:43 a.m., my phone buzzed. The final confirmation. "Investigator, additional evidence secured. The reporter is in position. SEC agents confirmed on site." I clenched my fists, inhaling sharply. This was it. The final countdown. Isabel appeared at my side, adjusting the veil with gentle hands. "Are you ready?" she whispered. I met her gaze in the mirror, searching for any trace of suspicion, any flicker of doubt. There was none. She still believed in the fairy tale. And after today, she never would again. I exhaled slowly, smoothing down the front of my gown, the envelope pressing against my thigh beneath the layers of fabric. The doors to the bridal suite swung open, revealing the wedding coordinator, her headset in place, clipboard clutched tightly. "Places, everyone," she announced, her voice chipper. "The guests are seated, and the groom is at the altar." I felt my stomach twist, a final surge of anticipation rising within me. Nathan was waiting for a moment that would never come. I reached for my bouquet, the weight of the flowers grounding me, and turned toward the doors. This was it, the moment before the fall. And as the first notes of Pachelbel's cannon drifted through the air, I stepped forward, toward the aisle, toward my destiny, toward the destruction of a man who had never seen it coming. The corridor leading to the grand doors of the church felt impossibly long. Each step forward was a step closer to the inevitable, closer to the moment when everything would unravel, when my carefully orchestrated plan would detonate in front of hundreds of witnesses. But for the first time since last night, doubt slithered through me like an unwelcome shadow. Not doubt about exposing Nathan. His betrayal, his greed, his deception deserved to be laid bare under the weight of the truth. But doubt about the people who would be caught in the crossfire. Eleanor, Isabel, two women who had done nothing but love me, who had embraced me as part of their family, who had spent months planning this wedding, as if it were the culmination of something beautiful. I had sat beside Eleanor as she designed the invitations, had listened as she talked about how she had dreamed of this day since Nathan was a child. "He's always been ambitious," she had said fondly. "But with you, Sienna, I see a softness in him, a kind of love I always hoped he'd find. A lie." The Nathan she had described was a man who did not exist. And today, in front of everyone, she would see him for what he truly was. Would she hate me for it? Would Isabel? For a fleeting second, I thought about walking away, not from the truth but from the spectacle. From turning this into something private, something handled behind closed doors. But no, Nathan had crafted his lies in the open. He had manipulated people under the warmth of their trust, had built his empire on deception, had used my love as nothing more than a strategic move in a grander scheme. No, the world deserved to see the mask slip from his face. The people he had deceived deserved to know the man he truly was. And as for Eleanor and Isabel, they deserved the truth too. I exhaled, steadying myself. This was bigger than love. Bigger than the weight of guilt pressing against my ribs. This was justice. The sound of heels clicking against the polished marble floors signaled the arrival of the wedding coordinator. She appeared in the doorway, beaming as she clutched her clipboard. 5 minutes, she chirped, practically vibrating with excitement. Everyone needs to be in position. The guests are waiting, and the groom is ready. Nathan Kingsley, standing at the altar, believing that today was the day he would win. A slow, cold satisfaction curled through me. He had no idea. I turned back toward the mirror one last time. My reflection was calm, poised, untouchable. The dress was a masterpiece of ivory silk and delicate lace, hugging my frame in a way that should have made me feel like a princess. Instead, it felt like armor. I reached down, fingers brushing against the hidden pocket where the envelope rested, pressed against my thigh. Inside, the truth waited. A collection of evidence so damning it would reduce Nathan's empire to rubble in mere minutes. A sharp knock sounded at the door, and my heart clenched as Eleanor stepped inside. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she took in the sight of me. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, pressing a hand to her chest. "You are radiant." I forced a smile, knowing this was the last moment she would look at me like this, with warmth, with love. She reached for my hands, squeezing them tightly. "I know how overwhelming this must feel," she said softly. "The weight of forever. But just breathe, darling. You and Nathan, you were made for this." A bitter taste coated my tongue. I held onto her hands for a beat longer than necessary. "Eleanor," I murmured, my voice quieter now. "Whatever happens today, just remember that I never wanted to hurt you." She frowned slightly, confusion flickering across her face. "Hurt me? Sweetheart, what are you?" The doors behind her swung open, and the wedding planner poked her head inside. "Places, everyone," she announced, her voice bright. "The string quartet is playing. It's time." Eleanor gave my hands one final squeeze, then turned, walking ahead to take her seat in the front row. I watched her go, my throat tightening. Then I straightened my shoulders, inhaled deeply, and lifted my chin. No more second-guessing. No more hesitation. It was time. The moment the grand doors swung open, the air shifted. The soft hum of conversation among the guests faded into silence, replaced by the delicate, familiar melody of Pachelbel's canon. The weight of 200 pairs of eyes settled on me as I took my first step forward. A vision in white. A picture of elegance, of grace, of a bride walking toward her future. But in reality, I wasn't walking toward forever. I was walking toward war. Nathan stood at the altar, his back straight, his expression crafted into something resembling devotion. His eyes found mine, and for a fleeting second, I saw it, the confidence, the certainty that today was his victory. My fingers curled around my bouquet, the weight of the envelope beneath my dress pressing against me like a silent reminder of what was coming. Every step forward was measured, each one bringing me closer to him, closer to the moment everything would come crashing down. I glanced briefly at the guests as I passed. Faces filled with admiration, with warmth. Some whispering how beautiful I looked, others smiling with quiet anticipation. They had come expecting a wedding, expecting a celebration. Instead, they would witness something entirely different. A reckoning. A slow smirk played at the edges of Nathan's lips as I reached the final few steps. He had no idea. I caught Blake's eye in the front row. His best man, the same one who had laughed along with him last night, who had encouraged his deception. His smirk faltered slightly when he saw the way I was looking at him. Good. Let the unease settle in. Let them feel it creeping up their spines, even if they didn't yet understand why. I took my final step. The music faded. Nathan extended his hand toward me. I hesitated just for a fraction of a second, just long enough for him to register it. Something flickered in his gaze. Confusion. A whisper of uncertainty. And then, just before I reached for him, I turned, slowly, deliberately, toward the congregation. The envelope in my pocket burned against my skin. I tightened my grip on the bouquet, inhaled deeply, and spoke. "Before we begin," I said, my voice carrying through the church, steady as steel. "There's something I need to say." A hush fell over the church. The weight of my words lingered in the air, thick and suffocating, like the moments before a thunderstorm cracks the sky wide open. "Before we begin, there's something I need to say." I felt Nathan stiffen beside me. His hand, still extended, hung between us, palm up, waiting for mine. But I didn't take it. I didn't even look at him. Instead, I turned toward the sea of guests, 200 pairs of expectant eyes watching me, their expressions ranging from confusion to quiet curiosity. Eleanor was smiling, though uncertainty flickered beneath the surface. Isabel, radiant in her champagne-colored bridesmaid dress, tilted her head slightly, sensing that something was off. And Blake, the man who had sat beside Nathan last night, laughing at my expense, was the first to shift in his seat, his smirk fading as realization began to dawn. Nathan chuckled softly under his breath, a forced sound, meant to break the tension. "Sienna," he murmured, just low enough for only me to hear. "What are you doing?" I turned then, finally meeting his gaze. His expression was carefully composed, the charming, polished mask he had worn so well for years still in place. But beneath it, I saw the first signs of something else. Fear. Good. I smiled, a small, almost wistful curve of my lips. The kind a bride might wear when she's about to say something sentimental, something beautiful. And then, I reached into the folds of my dress and pulled out the envelope. The movement was slow, deliberate. The sound of the paper sliding free was deafening in the absolute silence of the church. Nathan's face paled. The guests began to murmur, a low, buzzing sound that filled the space between us. I let the moment stretch, savoring it. And then I broke the seal. "Nathan," I said, my voice steady, clear. "Do you remember what you said to your friends last night?" His breath hitched. "Do you remember laughing?" I continued, tilting my head slightly, watching the first beads of sweat form at his temple. "Telling them I was just temporary? That this wedding was nothing more than a business transaction." Eleanor's smile vanished. Isabel's eyes widened. The buzzing in the church grew louder. Nathan's hand clenched into a fist. "Sienna," he said again, his voice lower now, sharper. A warning. But I was past warnings. I unfolded the first page. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced, my voice carrying effortlessly. Since today is a day of vows and promises, I thought it was only fair that you all hear some of Nathan's own words, in his own voice. A gasp rippled through the crowd as I lifted my phone and pressed play. And then there it was, Nathan's voice, crystal clear, unmistakable. Come on, man. You can't be serious about settling down with Sienna. A pause. Why not? She's perfect on paper. Laughter. Her trust fund will help expand Kingsley Enterprises. And she's completely devoted to me. The best part? She actually believes I love her. Gasps. Shocked whispers. A woman covered her mouth with her hand. Someone in the back murmured, "Oh my God!" I turned to Nathan then, watching as the color drained from his face, his perfectly composed mask beginning to crack. But I wasn't finished. She's just temporary anyway, his voice continued, playing from the speakers, until someone better comes along, someone more suitable for the long run. More laughter, more devastation. Eleanor made a sound, a sharp, wounded gasp, as if the air had been stolen from her lungs. Nathan moved then, stepping toward me, his hands reaching, desperate. "Sienna, stop this," he hissed, his voice low and urgent. "We can talk about this later, privately." I stepped back. Just enough for him to feel the distance, to understand that he no longer had control. "Privately," I echoed, my voice dripping with amusement. "Why? So you can twist your words? So you can spin another lie?" I turned to the guests, my gaze sweeping across them, locking eyes with the ones who mattered most. Eleanor, Isabel, Nathan's investors, the board members of Kingsley Enterprises, the journalists Harper had placed strategically throughout the crowd. They weren't looking at Nathan the same way anymore. They weren't looking at him like a successful businessman. They were looking at him like a fraud, like a man who had just been exposed in the most humiliating way possible. I held up the second document, the financial records, and if that wasn't enough, I continued, my voice steady. "Perhaps you'd like to hear about Nathan's offshore accounts? The shell companies? The embezzlement?" The murmurs erupted into full-blown chaos. Nathan's investors were already whispering to one another, their expressions dark, calculating. Blake was pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. Nathan took another step toward me, desperation flickering in his eyes. "Sienna, I swear to God." I dropped the papers. The pages scattered, floating to the ground like fallen leaves, each one filled with the truth. The journalists' cameras clicked, capturing every moment. And then, as if the universe had orchestrated it perfectly, the church doors swung open. Two men in dark suits entered. CC agents. Nathan's breath hitched audibly. Panic. Real, undeniable panic bled into his features as he turned toward them. They moved swiftly, cutting through the stunned crowd, their eyes locked on him. "Mr. Kingsley," one of them said, his voice firm, unwavering. "We need you to come with us." Gasps. A woman near the front row clutched her pearls, her face twisted in shock. "Nathan Kingsley," the second agent continued, stepping closer. "You are under investigation for financial crimes, including fraud and embezzlement. You will need to surrender your passport immediately." Nathan turned back to me, his expression wild, disbelieving. "You!" His voice was hoarse, a strangled sound. "You did this." I smiled. "I did." Eleanor was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face as she clutched Isabel's hand. Nathan's body tensed, his gaze darting between the agents, the guests, the journalists. He was trapped. There was no escape. I stepped forward, closing the final distance between us. Leaning in, I whispered, just for him, "Checkmate." And then I turned. Without another word, without looking back, I walked down the aisle, alone, with my head held high. And behind me, the world watched as Nathan Kingsley's empire crumbled. I had always imagined my wedding day ending with applause, cheers, and maybe even a few happy tears. But as I walked away from the altar, The only sounds that filled the grand cathedral were gasps, frantic whispers, and the sharp clicking of cameras capturing every second of Nathan Kingsley's downfall. Behind me, chaos erupted. The once majestic wedding scene had transformed into a battlefield of shock, betrayal, and consequences. Nathan was still frozen at the altar, his face a sickening shade of white. His hands, which had once reached for mine with confidence, were now clenched into desperate fists. He opened his mouth to speak, to say something, but no words came. There was nothing left for him to say. The SEC agents flanked him, their presence a silent warning that whatever escape plan he had once counted on was gone. And then, Nathan! Eleanor's voice cut through the stunned silence, sharp and broken. I turned slightly, just enough to see her rushing toward him, her heels clicking against the marble floor, her elegant hands trembling. "Tell me this isn't true," she pleaded, her voice raw with disbelief. "Tell me this is some kind of mistake." Nathan blinked, his chest rising and falling in erratic, uneven breaths. "Mother, is it true?" she demanded, her voice rising. Nathan swallowed. He looked at her, then at the scattered documents still drifting on the floor, then at the guests. His investors, business partners, family, friends, all staring at him as if he were a stranger. A liar, con artist. His silence was answer enough. Eleanor staggered back, as if the weight of the truth had physically struck her. Isabel rushed forward to steady her, but her own face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You!" Isabel's voice trembled. "You lied to me too." Nathan finally snapped, his mask slipping completely. "This isn't what it looks like," he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "Sienna, she's setting me up." A bitter laugh escaped me. I turned slowly, meeting his frantic gaze with the cold, unshakable truth. "You set yourself up, Nathan," I said, my voice ringing through the church like a final verdict. "I just made sure everyone saw it." The crowd murmured louder, like waves crashing over one another. Guests whispered in hushed, urgent tones. Some stood, shaking their heads, already distancing themselves from the disgrace unfolding before them. Others pulled out their phones, sending frantic texts, taking photos, ensuring that by the time they walked out of this church, the entire world would know what had just happened. And then, just when it seemed like the chaos had reached its peak, a sharp, clipped voice cut through the noise. "Nathan Kingsley," one of the agents said, stepping forward. "Please come with us now." Nathan turned on them, wild-eyed. "I haven't even been arrested," he snapped. "You don't have anything on me. We have enough to begin an immediate investigation," the agent replied smoothly. "And after today, I'm sure we'll have a lot more." Nathan's chest heaved as his gaze darted around the church, searching for someone, anyone, who would stand up for him. No one moved. Even Blake, his best friend and right-hand man, had sunk into his seat, staring at the ground as if he wished he could disappear. Nathan turned back to me then, and for the first time I saw something new in his eyes. Not confidence, not arrogance, but fear. Real, unfiltered fear. I lifted my chin, letting him see exactly what he had never understood. I wasn't the weak, naive woman he had thought I was. I wasn't the easy mark he had believed he could manipulate. I was the reckoning he had never seen coming. The agents stepped forward. Nathan flinched, his body tensing, before finally, with the weight of 200 watching eyes pressing down on him, he lowered his head and took the first step forward. As they led him down the aisle, the same aisle I was supposed to have walked to him, his downfall was cemented in history. The grand doors of the church swung open once more, and as Nathan Kingsley was escorted into a black car, his empire began to crumble. And just like that, the man who thought he had everything lost it all. The moment Nathan was gone, the weight in the air shifted. The chaos didn't end, it just morphed into something else. A quiet, stunned kind of devastation. I watched as guests slowly began to gather their things, whispering amongst themselves, their once bright excitement for the day reduced to hollow shock. Some slipped out quickly, eager to remove themselves from the fallout. Others lingered, still trying to process the spectacle they had just witnessed. And then there was Eleanor, still standing in the center of the church, frozen in place, her hands trembling at her sides. The mother who had just lost her son. Not in the literal sense, but in a way that might have been even worse. I swallowed hard, guilt twisting inside me. I had wanted this. I had planned this. And yet, seeing the pain on her face, the quiet devastation that had settled into her features, made it impossible to feel victorious. She turned slowly, her glassy eyes locking onto mine, and then she whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear it, "You should have told me." I had no answer, because maybe she was right, but Nathan had chosen this path. He had built this house of cards, and I had simply given the world the wind to blow it down. A hand touched my arm. I turned to find Isabel standing beside me, her face unreadable. For a moment we just stared at each other, the weight of everything that had just happened between us. Then finally she exhaled. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words should have hurt, but they didn't, because forgiveness was never something I had expected. Not from her, not from Eleanor, not from anyone who had been innocent in this destruction. I nodded, my throat tight. "I know." Isabel inhaled sharply, as if she was about to say something else. Maybe something cruel, maybe something kind. But before she could, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the ruins of what was supposed to be my wedding day. The string quartet had stopped playing long ago. The altar was abandoned. The grand floral arrangements, the ones we had spent months selecting, stood untouched, their beauty overshadowed by the wreckage of reality. I exhaled, my grip on my bouquet loosening. Then, slowly, deliberately, I unclasped my fingers and let the flowers fall to the floor. And without another glance back, I walked out of the church, not as a bride, not as a woman left at the altar, but as the woman who had walked away first. And for the first time in years, I was finally free. The world outside the church was bright, almost blindingly so. The sun sat high in the afternoon sky, casting long golden streaks across the steps where I now stood, my fingers still tingling from the weight of the bouquet I had let fall moments ago. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt the rush of satisfaction that comes with winning a long, brutal battle. But all I felt was weightless, not in the liberating, free-spirited way I had imagined, but in the way that something inside me had unraveled, untethered itself from everything I had once clung to. Nathan Kingsley was ruined. The perfect man, the golden boy, the charming entrepreneur who had fooled the world. He was gone, stripped of his power, his reputation, his future. And I had done that. I had walked into that church knowing exactly what I was going to do. I had orchestrated every single moment with precision, ensuring that when the truth hit, it would leave nothing standing. So why did I feel empty? Maybe because in some twisted, buried part of me, I had still wanted the illusion to be real. Not Nathan himself, not the man I had uncovered beneath the mask, but the version of him I had once loved. The version who had taken my hands on a balcony under the Santorini moonlight and whispered promises of forever. The version who had kissed me slowly on Sunday mornings, who had tucked strands of hair behind my ear with an absent-minded tenderness that had felt real. But it had never been real. And the moment I had realized that, the moment I had truly accepted that every touch, every word, every carefully curated moment had been strategy, something inside me had shattered beyond repair. Now, as I stood at the top of the church steps, listening to the echoes of chaos still unfolding behind me, I knew that nothing about today would ever leave me feeling victorious. Because today had never been about winning. It had been about ending. And sometimes, endings weren't beautiful. They were brutal, necessary, but never beautiful. A sharp, ragged voice cut through the stillness. "You!" I turned. Nathan stood just inside the church doors, the light catching against the beads of sweat lining his forehead. His tie was undone. His suit jacket slightly rumpled from where the SEC agents had gripped his arm. His mask was gone. No more practiced charm. No more confident arrogance. Just raw, unfiltered devastation. For a moment, he simply stared at me, his chest rising and falling in uneven, shaky breaths. And then he stepped forward, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "I did love you," he said, his words jagged, forced through clenched teeth. In my way, I let the silence stretch between us. I could have laughed, could have mocked him for trying to salvage the last remnants of a lie. But I didn't. Instead, I tilted my head, studying him carefully, as if I were seeing him for the very last time. "Your way," I said finally, my voice quiet but firm, "was never enough." Something flickered in his eyes. Something unspoken. Something desperate. Maybe, for the first time, he realized it too. That his way, his calculated, self-serving way, had cost him everything. I didn't wait for a response. Didn't wait for another excuse, another attempt to rewrite history. Instead, I turned, and I walked away. Each step down the church stairs felt surreal. The sounds of the city were muffled, distant, as if I were walking through water. I passed guests still lingering on the steps, their faces filled with shock, curiosity, awe. Some turned their phones toward me, capturing the moment in shaky videos, already preparing to spread the story that would dominate headlines by nightfall. The runaway bride who brought down an empire. The woman who destroyed Nathan Kingsley. Let them say what they wanted. I didn't care, because this wasn't their story. This was mine. The moment my heels hit the pavement, I exhaled, long and slow, as if I were releasing something I had carried for far too long. And maybe I was. For years, I had been walking toward something I thought was my future. Toward a life that had been perfectly designed, wrapped in gold and tied with a ribbon. But it had all been a lie. And now, for the first time in years, I was walking in the opposite direction. Not toward something, but away. Away from deceit. Away from manipulation. Away from the version of myself who had once believed she wasn't strong enough to stand alone. The sun was warm against my skin, a quiet contrast to the coldness still lingering in my veins. I reached up and unclasped the pearl necklace Eleanor had given me, a symbol of tradition, a symbol of a family I had almost become a part of, a symbol of a love that had never really been love at all. I turned it over in my palm once. Then, without hesitation, I let it slip through my fingers and fall onto the pavement. And with that, I kept walking, alone. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of it. The rise of a new life. The city was different in the afternoon light. Or maybe it was just me. As I walked down the bustling streets, the weight of the past few years slowly peeled away with every step. The towering buildings no longer felt suffocating. The endless rush of cars and voices no longer blurred together in an overwhelming haze. For the first time in a long time, I was simply aware of the sun warming my skin, of the crisp autumn breeze tangling through my hair, of the rhythmic tapping of my heels against the pavement. I was no longer a woman walking toward a carefully constructed future. I was a woman stepping into the unknown. And I wasn't afraid. I found myself standing in front of a quiet cafe, the kind of place I never would have noticed before. My old life had been filled with luxury, high-end restaurants, exclusive clubs, private rooftop bars where the elite gathered to sip overpriced cocktails and trade secrets. But today I wanted something different, something real. I stepped inside, the bell above the door chiming softly, the scent of fresh coffee and warm pastries wrapped around me, grounding me in a way I hadn't realized I needed. I ordered a black coffee, simple, unembellished. A far cry from the elaborate drinks I had once pretended to enjoy because they fit the image Nathan had wanted me to maintain. I found a seat by the window, watching as the city moved around me, alive and vibrant. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was truly part of it. No longer just a piece on someone else's chessboard. No longer just an accessory to a man's ambition. I was me, and that was enough. A new beginning. The first headline dropped an hour later. Runaway bride exposes billionaire groom's lies. Inside the scandal that shocked New York. Then another. Nathan Kingsley. From golden boy to corporate fraud, how his fiancé brought him down. My phone vibrated relentlessly, messages pouring in. Some from old friends who suddenly wanted to reconnect, others from journalists desperate for an exclusive. I ignored them all. I had no interest in reliving what had already been done. Nathan's downfall was his story, but my rise? That was mine. As I sipped my coffee, my mind wandered to the future, something I had never allowed myself to truly consider before. For years, my identity had been tied to Nathan, to our relationship, to the idea of who I was supposed to become as his wife, his partner, a perfectly sculpted figure in his perfectly sculpted life. But now I had a blank slate, and I intended to use it, turning the tables. The Kingsley name was in freefall. By the end of the day, Kingsley Enterprises stock had plummeted. Investors were pulling out. Lawsuits were being filed. Harper Langley, the journalist I had entrusted with the full story, had done her job well. Every article, every report, every carefully unearthed detail was everywhere. The world wasn't just watching Nathan's empire crumble. They were watching me, not as the scorned woman, not as the victim, but as the woman who had fought back. And as much as I had thought I wanted to step away from it all, to disappear into a quiet, anonymous life, something inside me shifted as I read the messages flooding my inbox. Not the ones from reporters, not the ones from people pretending they had always supported me, but the ones from women. Women who had been manipulated, deceived, trapped in relationships with men who had seen them as nothing more than stepping stones. Women who had stayed silent because they thought they had no choice. Women who, after today, realized that they did. I set my coffee down, exhaling slowly. Maybe this wasn't just about me anymore. Maybe this was about all of us. A business reborn. The Kingsley name would never recover. But mine was just getting started. It started as an idea, something small, something barely formed. A thought at the back of my mind as I sat in that cafe, watching the city move around me. What if I built something of my own? What if I used what I had learned, everything Nathan had taught me, everything I had uncovered in the world of corporate deception, not to destroy but to protect, not to manipulate but to empower? The idea grew. Over the next few months, I surrounded myself with the best legal minds, the best financial experts, the best people I could trust. And then, I launched something that would become unstoppable. A consulting firm. Not just any firm. A firm dedicated to protecting women. Women in business. Women in finance. Women in corporate America who had been silenced, overlooked, used as pawns in games they hadn't even known they were playing. I named it Carter and Company. My name. Not Nathan's. Not tied to any man. Just mine. Within weeks, the demand was overwhelming. Women wanted guidance. They wanted protection. They wanted justice. And I gave it to them, because I had lived it. And I knew exactly how to fight back. The power of moving on. One evening, months later, I found myself back at the Kingsley Grand. The very hotel where, all those nights ago, my world had shattered. Except this time, I wasn't there as someone's fiancé. I wasn't there as a woman who had been betrayed. I was there as a CEO. I walked through the marble lobby, my heels clicking against the floor, past the very lounge where I had once stood. Listening to the man I loved reduce me to nothing more than a temporary investment. And this time, I didn't feel pain. I felt power. Nathan was gone. His world was gone. And mine? Mine was just beginning. A love that's real. I thought I had closed my heart off for good. Thought I had built walls so high that no one would ever reach me again. But life has a way of surprising you. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. A meeting with a potential business partner that turned into dinner. A conversation that turned into laughter. A man who saw me, not as a conquest, not as a means to an end, but as a woman who had rebuilt herself from the ground up. And when he reached for my hand, months later, under the glow of city lights, I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore, because this time I knew my worth, and I would never settle for anything less. The final chapter. 1 year after the day I walked out of that church alone, I stood in front of a packed auditorium. The audience was filled with women. Some in business, some in politics, some still trying to find their own way forward. They were here because of my story, because of what I had done, because I had proven that we do not have to be silent. I stepped up to the podium, looking out at them, and smiled. 1 year ago, I began. I walked away from a wedding that was never meant to happen. Soft laughter rippled through the crowd. I walked away from a man who thought he could use me, who thought I was weak, who thought I would never fight back. I exhaled, steady and strong. But I did. And today, my gaze swept the room. I stand here, not as a woman who was betrayed, not as a woman who was left at the altar, but as a woman who walked away, who rebuilt, who rose. A pause, a heartbeat of silence, and then thunderous applause. I smiled, because this was the real happily ever after. Justice and redemption. The weight of the past year settled in waves. Some days, it felt like a distant dream, blurred by time and resilience. Other days, it came back in sharp flashes. The gasps in the church, the way Nathan had looked at me when he realized his empire was crumbling. The moment I walked away from it all, leaving behind not just a wedding, but an entire life. A life I had outgrown. Now, standing in my corner office, overlooking the Manhattan skyline, I could barely recognize the woman I had been back then. I had stepped into the unknown and built something stronger, something entirely mine. Carter and Company had taken off faster than I had anticipated. What had started as a small consulting firm had become a powerhouse, exposing corporate fraud, protecting women in finance, and ensuring that no one else would have to go through what I did. We had already won 4 major cases against companies attempting to manipulate and exploit their employees. High-profile men, ones just like Nathan, were being held accountable in ways they never had before. And the best part? This time, I wasn't doing it for revenge. I was doing it for justice, for women who had been silenced, for people who had been underestimated, for the version of myself who had once believed that love was enough to justify blindness. It wasn't, and it never would be again. Nathan's trial. The Kingsley scandal hadn't faded with time. If anything, it had only grown. What had started as whispers in the business world became a landmark case in corporate fraud. The SEC had spent months investigating every hidden account, every shell corporation, every falsified report Nathan had ever signed off on. And the result? Indictments, multiple felony charges. A fall from grace so steep that even those who had once idolized him were forced to admit the truth. The trial was set for the spring. Nathan Kingsley versus the United States government. The courtroom was packed on the first day. Journalists lined the benches. Cameras clicked every time Nathan entered or exited the building. And the media latched onto every new development like wolves circling fresh prey. Nathan, of course, had hired the best lawyers money could buy, or at least what was left of his money. But no legal team could erase the paper trail. The evidence was overwhelming. Documents, witness testimonies, a financial web so tangled it was impossible to defend. But what shocked me the most? Nathan never looked at me. Not once. I attended every major court session, not because I wanted to see him suffer, but because I wanted closure. I wanted to see him face the truth without the mask, without the arrogance. I wanted to see if he finally understood what he had done. But he never met my eyes. He kept his head high, his posture stiff, his jaw clenched as if he could still pretend he was in control. Until the final day. Until the verdict was read. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all counts. A single sentence. And just like that, Nathan Kingsley, once the golden boy of Wall Street, was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison with no possibility of early parole. He flinched then, just for a moment, just long enough for me to see it. The realization, the fear, the knowledge that for the first time in his life he had lost, and there was no way out. And still, even then, he never looked at me. As the guards escorted him out of the courtroom, I stood. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to, because for the first time, Nathan Kingsley was completely alone. And I was free. A conversation with Eleanor. 3 days after the trial, my office phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something in my gut told me to pick up. Sienna. The voice on the other end was one I hadn't heard in months. Soft, elegant, edged with something unreadable. Eleanor Kingsley. For a moment, I wasn't sure what to say. The last time we had spoken, she had looked at me with betrayal in her eyes. She had told me I should have warned her. And maybe back then she had been right. But now she knew the truth. Eleanor, I said, keeping my voice even. I wasn't sure if I'd ever hear from you again. She exhaled slowly. I wasn't sure either. Silence stretched between us. Then, I wanted to say thank you. I blinked. For what? For exposing my son for what he truly was. Her voice didn't shake. There was no hesitation, just quiet acceptance. You were right, she continued. I didn't want to see it. I wanted to believe Nathan was the man I had raised him to be. But he wasn't. He never was. I swallowed, unsure of what to say. Eleanor had lost everything. The son she had adored, the legacy she had spent her life building. And yet she sounded lighter. At least now, she said after a pause. He can't hurt anyone else. No, he couldn't. And for the first time, I think she found peace in that. Isabel's redemption. Of all the people I had left behind that day at the church, Isabel had hurt the most. She had been my friend, my soon-to-be sister, and I had shattered her world. For months we hadn't spoken. I had assumed she wanted nothing to do with me. But then, one evening, as I was leaving my office, I saw her waiting by the entrance. She looked different, stronger, not the naive girl who had once defended her brother with blind faith. I owe you an apology, she said softly. I shook my head. No, you don't. I do, she insisted. I was angry. I blamed you. But the truth is, I was angry at myself. For not seeing what was right in front of me. For letting Nathan use me. Just like he used everyone else. She looked away, her jaw tightening. I spent my whole life believing in him. And now, I don't know who I am without him. I took a step closer. Then maybe, I said gently, it's time to figure that out. Her eyes met mine. And for the first time since the wedding, she smiled. A real smile. A hopeful one. The future. Nathan was gone. The Kingsley empire had crumbled. The weight of the past had finally settled. Its dust no longer clinging to me, no longer holding me back. And now I was thriving. Carter and Company had expanded globally, working with firms to prevent corporate corruption before it started. Women, CEOs, entrepreneurs, executives, came to me not for help in escaping their problems, but to conquer them. And me? I was no longer defined by what had happened to me. I was defined by what I had built from it. One evening, as I walked through Central Park, my phone buzzed. A message from someone unexpected. Isabel, I'm thinking of starting my own firm. I want to make things right. Can we talk? I smiled. Because redemption didn't come from erasing the past. Came from learning, growing, choosing to be better. And maybe, just maybe, Isabel was ready to do exactly that. I sent back a single reply. Me, let's meet for coffee. I think we have a lot to talk about. As I hit send, the city lights shimmered around me. A new chapter was beginning. And this time it was entirely mine. Love the right way. Love. It was something I once thought I understood. I had loved Nathan, or at least I had loved the version of him I believed was real. I had built my life around him, molded myself into the woman I thought he wanted, convinced myself that his approval was the foundation of my happiness. But that wasn't love. That was illusion. True love, the kind that wasn't built on manipulation, control, or silent sacrifices, had once seemed impossible. Until now, an unexpected connection. It started simply, an invitation to speak at a corporate ethics conference in London, one of the many I had been asked to attend after the Kingsley scandal became a landmark case in business fraud. I had agreed, not thinking much of it. But that was before I met Damien Lancaster. The name itself was known in finance, but for very different reasons than the Kingsleys of the world. He was young for his level of success, but unlike Nathan, his rise had been earned, built on integrity, not deception. When we were introduced at the conference's welcome dinner, I expected another polished businessman, someone who spoke in rehearsed lines, someone who played the game of power with the same ease Nathan once had. But Damien wasn't like that. He didn't shake my hand like he was closing a deal. He smiled, warm and genuine, and simply said, "I admire what you did, Sienna." Not many people would have had the courage to walk away like that. There was no trace of pity in his voice, no curiosity laced with judgment, just respect. And that was the first time I felt it. The possibility that love, real love, was still out there. A different kind of love. We kept crossing paths over the following months. Not by design, but by coincidence. A meeting in New York about corporate accountability policies. A dinner in Paris after we had both spoken at the same summit. A charity event in San Francisco where we ended up at the same table, trading quiet smiles over candlelight. And each time I noticed something different. Damien never pushed, never rushed, never made me feel like I had to fit into some mold, some expectation, some silent agreement that I should be grateful he was interested in me. He listened. He let me speak without interruption, without trying to fix me, without waiting for his turn to talk. And he never once treated me like a woman defined by her past. With him, I wasn't just the woman who exposed Nathan Kingsley. I wasn't the runaway bride who brought down an empire. I was just Sienna, and for the first time in years, that was enough. Learning to love again. One evening, months after we first met, Damien and I found ourselves in London again, sitting in a quiet rooftop bar overlooking the Thames. I could feel the shift in the air between us. Something unspoken, something neither of us had dared acknowledge yet. I set my wine glass down, studying him. "You're patient," I said, almost accusingly. He raised an eyebrow. "Should I not be?" I exhaled, shaking my head with a soft laugh. "It's just different. You don't expect anything from me." Damien leaned back in his chair, tilting his head slightly. "Sienna, I know what it's like to be seen as something you're not. I know what it's like to have people try to own parts of you, to shape your story for you. I'm not here to do that." Something in my chest tightened, because that was it. That was the difference. Nathan had wanted me, but only as a tool, a calculated piece of his empire. Damien didn't want to own me. He wanted to know me, and I had no idea how to handle that. Breaking down the walls. I had spent so much time building walls, protecting myself, ensuring that no man would ever use me again. But Damien never tried to tear them down. He simply stood outside them, patient, unwavering, waiting for me to decide if I wanted to open the gates myself. And one night, after too many stolen glances, too many near kisses, too many moments of pretending I didn't feel what I did, I finally did. We were in my apartment in New York, a quiet evening after a long day of meetings. He had made us coffee because despite his absurd wealth, Damien insisted on doing the small things himself. I watched him from across the kitchen, something in me shifting, something I had been too afraid to acknowledge before. This man had never asked me to change, never asked me to shrink myself, never tried to rewrite my story. He had simply stood beside me, through months of quiet moments, never demanding, never expecting, just there. And I had never realized how much I wanted to be seen like that. So I took a breath. I crossed the room, and when I kissed him, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not adrenaline, not the thrill of being wanted, but safety. The kind of safety that doesn't come from power or control, but from being with someone who knows exactly who you are and still chooses you. A love that feels like freedom. Falling in love with Damien wasn't a dramatic event. There were no grand declarations, no over-the-top gestures meant to impress me. It was quiet, steady, real. It was him remembering how I took my coffee without asking. It was long conversations at midnight, unraveling the things I had once been too afraid to share. It was trust, built not on promises but on actions, on a kind of unwavering consistency that I had never experienced before. And the first time he told me he loved me, it wasn't a performance. It wasn't a tool, a strategy, a means to an end. It was just a truth, spoken into the space between us as easily as breathing. And when I said it back, I didn't hesitate, because I had learned something. Love isn't about possession. It isn't about power. It isn't about finding someone to complete you. It's about finding someone who sees you fully. Your past, your scars, your strengths, and never asks you to be anything other than exactly who you are. And that was a love worth holding on to. The wedding that was meant to be. 2 years after I walked out of that church, I stood in front of a mirror once more, wearing a white dress. But this time there was no doubt, no deception, no hidden secrets waiting to shatter beneath the weight of the truth. This time I wasn't marrying a man who needed me for power. I was marrying a man who simply loved me. The ceremony was small, a garden, surrounded by only the people who truly mattered. No cameras, no staged perfection, just us. Eleanor was there, sitting in the front row, tears glistening in her eyes. Not from pain, but from happiness. Isabel stood beside me as my bridesmaid, a silent reminder that redemption is possible, even after the deepest betrayals. And when I walked down that aisle, this time toward a man who met my gaze with nothing but love, I knew. This wasn't about proving anything. This wasn't about winning. This wasn't about redemption. This was simply love. The right way, the only way. And as Damien took my hand, his thumb brushing gently over my skin, I knew that this time, forever wasn't a trap. It was freedom,